Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of ForbesWomen. 2025 has been a rather rough year for women, especially women in the workplace. At this point in December, we have seen nearly 500,000 women pushed out of the workplace entirely. And new reporting from McKinsey and Lean In show that fewer companies than ever before are supporting women's ambition, and they're also finding a bit of an ambition gap between men and women. Joining us to discuss these findings and also what she's seeing at her own organization is the CEO of Chief, Alison Moore. Alison, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Maggie.
So I framed this as kind of a rough year for women or women in the workplace. You run Chief, which is a terrific resource for senior executive women. How would you describe this year as it relates to women in the workplace or women in the C-suite?
I think this year has had no shortage of volatility, change, um, uncertainty, certainly in the world as we speak, but in the space of business and creating you know, trajectory for whatever business women leaders are running, it's been tumultuous. And I think when I think about the women in chief, when I think about the women in my own, social circle, many of whom are in chief, some are not, the word that keeps coming back to me is resilience
Mm.
for women leaders. And, the recognition that, the tumult are things that we are going to have to always face as leaders. That's always been the case of any leadership role. There are things that are thrown in the way that seem to be a lot of things in the world right now that are causing change. There are things that are just crazy things that are going to shift the future of work dramatically. I think about AI, and I
Mm.
think about what is happening just in the presence of AI, or even the knowledge of a different kind of evolving presence of AI that has crossed so many different industries. It's all one common red thread across all. So, it's just a juggling ball. It's a juggling ball for anyone in a leadership role for all the reasons that, we've discussed in the past. For women, it's just another added layer of volatility, along with everything that comes from being a woman leader and the responsibilities at home, the responsibilities in their job, the responsibilities in their career track, and what they have as aspirations for themselves. You have to add it all to the pot. And so you need to have a modicum of resilience, I think.
Just a little bit. Now, one of the things that this new report from McKinsey and Lean In found is that fewer companies say that they are committed to promoting and advancing women's careers, or at least calling that a priority. About
Mm,
4 or 5 years ago, some 90% of companies said, yes, absolutely, diversity, equity, inclusion, women's advancement, this is a priority. That number has dropped to just a bit above 50%, which I think and suspect reflects the political climate that we're in a little bit. But in talking to the women who are chief members, have you talked to them about employee resource groups or mentoring groups or things they're doing within their own workplaces to support women? And do you have a sense that those types of efforts have taken a hit this year?
yeah. So two parts of that. From the women in chief, I think there's always been a recognition for, women leaders who gather together and in conversation and leading teams of younger women, more junior women, that there those sort of informal networks of promoting and supporting and pushing together and, pulling up something from the ground up, that is a constant mindset. A lot of conversations in chief around mentoring, a lot of conversations around, helping connect folks to interviewing. So whether it's for mentoring for, more junior folks, or even colleague wise, folks in job transition, there's just more, I think, of a very centered effort to help and create those networks for help, and for coordination and collaboration. So that is, I think, present, and I think that spirit has gotten even higher
Mm.
in what have been some, changes in the business landscape with respect to the declared state of support for women in as you were mentioning in development programs. I see there are changes that have happened there, but in many ways, I think it follows the bell curve. There are companies that perhaps did not want to be investing that much in support for women executives or support for other kinds of groups executives. And I think they've decided that they are no longer going to do that. And then that's their decision. I would say that's a smaller group of people. Frankly, those are not organizations that we interface with. There are a lot of organizations, I think about ELF, I think about Costco, I think about others that are embracing and doubling down on investment for women leaders and women executives, and that is happening too. The lion's share, I think, of companies that are in this, thinking about and perhaps, did say to that report, we're not backing women specifically, but we are still backing women, development programs in which women are supported. And I think it's my question is like, what is the original question? What are the nuances behind the answers? And for us, we have tons of corporate partners that we sit down at the table and think about, okay, what are your objectives this year? And how can we co-create something that meets your objectives to support the women leaders and the executives that you're seeing in your company? So I think it's a diverse patchwork of answers and maybe not as monolithic as it was a couple of years ago when it was one big rousing answer.
That's a fair point. And any sort of career development program that is offered to an entire workforce will, by nature, benefit women. But you also mentioned kind of the informal networking and mentorship that can
Yeah.
happen. So, what's your sense of how important that type of informal networking is for someone's career path?
I think it's deeply important. And I think it's deeply important for women. And intrinsically, it's always, women who are in leadership positions, 15, 20, years of experience, they've gone through this already. Women are less apt to have sponsors in companies. In many ways, you get sponsorship from the people in the rungs, above you that often look like you. And this is well known in the dynamics of human behavior. And I think women do get fewer sponsors. And fewer sponsors or like less sponsor backing, I will say, does affect, it can make it a little harder to get a promotion. It does perhaps make you more subjected to less job security. There are consequences of that. You don't get the juicy kind of stretch assignments and you don't get the kind of um, anointment to kind of push yourself. So in that sphere, that I think has always been something that women in companies and in corporations and women executives have worked against, there is this more informal tagging, right? There is an informal understanding, and I have always felt this at every company I've been through, HBO, NBC, Universal, like, there's a women's networking looking out for, promoting, pushing, not at the crazy advancement of others, but just in the recognition that there might be a different kind of like shoulder to lean in on, and thinking about that in terms of mentorship or your junior teams or your colleagues that might be struggling. Like it's just an informal network, and I think it can be very powerful. So I think women do give a little more space to that because we've had to.
That's a very good point. It bubbles up informally almost everywhere, almost regardless of what year we're in. Now,
Yeah.
I want to move to the idea of ambition
Mhm.
because this Women in the Workplace report has the headline findings are that there is a gap in ambition
Yes.
as defined by the search for a promotion between women and men. And I just want to read a few statistics from this study. And this comes directly from McKinsey and Lean In. The gap is most pronounced at the entry and senior leader levels, where 69% of entry level women want a promotion versus 80% of entry level men. 84% of senior level women want to be promoted versus 92% of men, senior level men. So, Allison, what do you make of that data? And again, there's probably nuance in the question. I have no idea how many years the women polled have been in their position. And if someone has just gotten a promotion, I can
Right.
imagine saying, no, I don't want a promotion. I just got one this year. I need another year under my belt. Or if it was I would have to pull up the appendices to see how this was worded, but just in general, what do you make of the gap that this data found?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of great nuggets in that report, and I certainly uh, can appreciate the question and how they were kind of getting around that point. But I honestly don't think it tells the whole story. And in fact, when ambition is measured strictly inside corporate structures, which have its own sort of, you know, ecosystem, and then also defined by solely this idea of a desire for promotion. Yeah, there is a gap between men and women, but then, if you widen that lens, it's the gap is not ambition between men and women per se. It's ambition and how it's defined. And that, for us, we are seeing a much more expansive definition of what ambition means for women today and a more modern take on it. And I think what the report assumes is that the ambition can only be defined through a linear ladder climb in which promotion to the next hierarchical rung is the best next step. And if you are not wanting that, for instance, but perhaps you are looking for a lattice move, that's what we call it, across a different division, same industry, different, same title, different industry, different company. It doesn't account for that mobility of that comes from what and oftentimes is a woman defining her own career track, like a more personalized career track versus this linear ladder climb. And that was the thing that just didn't sit true to us at Chief based on, what I see in the Chief membership for sure, but also based on a survey that we did, which actually asked the question beyond the ladder and trying to look, okay, the quintessential framework is the ladder climb. Well, what's underneath that? And that was a set of research that we did a couple months ago before this research came out from McKinsey with women leaders and women chief leaders and found something very different. And 86% of the female leaders that we queried in this research and we did with Harris Poll say that they are more ambitious than 5 years ago. And when
Mm.
you just think about that, and then you juxtapose that with the report coming from McKinsey, the McKinsey report reflects corporate America dynamics with a broad brush, in my view, and again through the prism of promotion only. But truthfully, the space for women leaders, there have been so many more options over the last 5 years. I mean, I would actually say the last 10 years, for women, in terms of different kinds of job modes. And these are for senior women leaders. So solopreneurs, investors, portfolio careers. I mean, shoot, content creators. I can't even imagine jumping out of my job to be a content creator. That would be a terrible day for everybody involved if I did, not having those skills. But fractionals, we're very different than consultants. You're coming in at a precision layer at top levels, and you're utilizing this wealth of experience you've had from behind. So that playing field has changed, and those are the things that dynamic and taking advantage of it is what's contributing to these 86% of female leaders who say, I'm more ambitious because I see more opportunities for me to grab the wheel, have a personal career track, have more agency over what it is that I do and how I kind of run my career and more control. Um, a lot of benefits come from that. So no environment, corporate and or solopreneur, everything has its hardships and its ups and downs. I mean, that's as my grandmother used to say, that's why they call it work. But I think to look at it as that one environment and make this broad statement that women are no longer ambitious is not the full picture.
Now, the Harris polling or the collaboration that Chief did with Harris polling
Hmm.
found that women rank financial success, decision-making power, time and flexibility, autonomy, and agency above job titles, which I
Yeah.
think parlays almost exactly into what you were just saying. So, can you talk a little bit more about how ambition showed up in your own research and how you think of ambition as it relates to women's careers?
Yeah, I think when we unpacked the data and looked at it, just it sent it gave a sense of optimism, I would say,
Mm.
in the great field that we already talked about of chaos and change and the unknown in the future of work. And, 96% of the women that we surveyed had made bold career moves, navigating major transitions, and 71% of those people had made those big changes by choice.
Mm.
The usual thing when you hear about women, particularly senior women stepping out of careers, is that they were forced out, and there's definitely a lot of changes going on, just in the landscape of everything with the economy and everything that's happening again with AI. And as you get to the tippy top of roles, that air gets a little thin up there. So I certainly want to acknowledge that there are people who have moved out of those and made transitions not by choice. But with
Mhm.
71% saying it was by choice, I think that was a very interesting stat and surprised me. And I think the other piece that was very surprising to me, which leads to your question, is that 92% of the women said that they feel emboldened, not scared, to create their own career paths. Like, I don't know that we would have seen that kind of data a few years ago. And there is something about this combination of different work types that align with where we've seen as a business culture, if you will, over the last 10 years, and then also the kind of cognizance of what the future of work might bring. There is this disruption, but it does bring opportunity. And I think women are seeing this, reacting to disruption, seeing future disruption, and instead of putting their head under the sand, they are saying this actually might be an opportunity, and I feel pretty excited about it because the last stat I'll just share with you is 83% of the women that we talked to agree that the playbook they were handed 20 years ago no longer suits. And
Mm.
so certainly there are women who, I think would, and we have many of these women in chief. They are stay within corporate. They have full plans of being within corporate and navigating within corporate. But even the toolbox that you have to navigate corporate is different today. And in addition to that, there are other opportunities outside of corporate that are rich and robust and utilize all the leadership experience that you have accrued over time, and that is exciting to women, not daunting.
I have so many follow-up questions. I want to start with the toolbox that you referenced. What is the one or maybe two biggest ways that the toolbox for women navigating the corporate ladder, the corporate landscape, how has that changed in the last 5 to 10 years, in your view?
I think, and being a being a person of a certain age, I think there was always this perception that you could get into a corporate environment, and again, back to the ladder image. You step in the rung, you do the good work. People, you work hard, you get recognized, you move up, and truthfully, that conveyor belt of assumption has not really always been true for women. Um, some of that have been changes in the landscape and in the business landscape. But when you think about the idea that most often a woman's sort of life intercedes with her career plans track, right? So there are childbearing years, and frankly, there are childbearing and caring years, right? And then there are frankly parent caring years.
Hmm.
And as soon as you leave one, you kind of end up in the other. And those responsibilities lie, and I can say this broadly, disproportionately with women. There are certainly many examples of men doing, balancing the same thing. But if you looked at it on a chart, I would say it was predominantly women that kind of balance those two pieces. And so these realities have become even more, I think, acute in COVID and post-COVID areas, right? So looking at that, what does that tell us for the toolbox? You must be, you may have the intention to stay somewhere for a very long time. I'm not sure you can always assume that the company will keep you there for a long time. No animus, not antagonism, just reality. And so in the face of that, what is it that you do for Maggie Inc., Allison Inc., to widen your toolbox outside of just doing an incredible kick-ass job, which you should do because that everyone should be bringing their kick-ass job. Sorry, I probably shouldn't be cursing. To
That's
the
okay.
to the job. But what it makes me think of is, don't be afraid of being of bold moves. Think about when you're in a corporate environment, think about the places that you've been doing this for a long time. What if I worked on this other division? I cross-trained across lots of different places. Um, Part of it was a curiosity, part of it was a hunger to do some new things, and I always brought whatever I was just doing into that new space. So opening up mindsets to those bold changes. Recognize what I said earlier, that disruption provides opportunity. And so what does that mean for you when you look at the toolbox? What can you open your doors to more readily to get you better trained and ready for what's coming next? Because we don't know.
Mm,
And I think networking in a business sphere. So I'm a mother. I have lots of friends that I met through my daughter's school. Um, those are those are my mama friends. Many of them work, some of them don't. But when I think about networking and for business for Allison Inc., I'm thinking about other women in other businesses that I'm just learning and curiously figuring out and learning from them. And I think that is when I say changing the toolbox, that's what I mean, like opening up the aperture about what it is that you need for you as a business leader and climbing your own career track. What does that mean today? As opposed to just assuming that you jump on the conveyor belt and it moves as long as you do a good job. I just I think the story is a little more complicated than that.
what you're describing is actually having an entrepreneurial spirit, even if you are within a corporate ladder, in my view. That's how I would
I agree.
synthesize what
I,
you
I absolutely
said.
agree with that. Yeah. And I think that that is something that was and my probably just based on my age, I think that language was thrown out many years ago, like an entrepreneur, an innovator in the in the corporate environment. I think all of that's true, but I don't know that women were creating new toolboxes with that spirit. They were
Mm.
maybe imbuing that spirit mentally, but when you turn that into action, you may have to act, move, think a little bit differently in order to imbue that benefit of the entrepreneurial spirit back to yourself.
The other follow-up question I had based on what you said a few minutes ago, that 70% who've chosen to make a big leap or to make a change. We've talked a little bit about the growth of AI, the tumultuous economy, the growth of the creator industry. Is it any one of these things that you think is spurring people to make big changes, or is it just the alchemy of everything kind of happening and maybe having the example of other women who've struck out on their own and instead of having just one job in corporate, they are a consultant, they are an author, and they've become a content creator, and through those three lenses have three different income streams now.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think some of it is just a reflection on the behaviors are already starting, which are, they are thinking of themselves as Maggie Inc., Allison Inc., and what else am I doing? So they are doing portfolio things, even if they're in seat in a job, right? They're maybe an investor, they're sitting on a board. Um, I think so that idea is opening up mindsets a little bit more. I think there's not, we don't see like everyone's becoming a content creator. It's just to your point, the field has opened up and the myth of playing it safe has, kind of started to erode, which in an exciting way. Um, Women are getting, I think, and women leaders particularly are getting more crisp on the reasons that they want to create change and for them for their career track. And in many ways, these are big, big, big reasons to change. Not because I'm looking for a bigger title or more salary. Everyone will take more salary, but looking for like whatever um, corporate accolades. What they're looking for is growth, meaningful impact, value alignment, right? Autonomy, like you were mentioning. These are big drivers, you know, with like financial and title change coming actually on the back end, which is interesting to me because I think that that is just a reflection societally of what and again, I where we have come and in many ways I see that as a sort of raw optimism. I mean, in the face of chaos, I mean, understandably, and it's not optimism like, wow, it's, everything seems so easy now. No, it is optimism with the very simple term is I can. And in many ways, the optimism of saying I can do this, that's half the battle.
You led right into what I was planning to be my final question, which
Yeah.
is seeing the data from McKinsey, but from your own polling with Harris. Do you have predictions for women's employment or advancement in 2026? Do you think we will see more solopreneurs? Do you think we will see more women redefining ambition in their own terms? Have you thought about what next year could bring as it relates to executive women, senior women?
Yeah, if you take the idea that the average woman leader now holds the three professional identities, some of what we just talked about, and the idea that, and the response we've had from this, kind of clarion call for chief and the sort of, in the partnership with Harris, but it was also just this idea that women's careers are never linear and being okay to say that. And that the recognition that does not only have to be defined by linear
Mm.
path, and again, that can be linear in the same job in corporate. You can go to other corporate places, or it could be this sort of other mix of solopreneur, entrepreneur, that kind of thing. But wherever field you're playing in, it's multidimensional and it has, with the two or three more identities in your professional identity, it's portfolio based. And so I think we will, and then you pair that optimism, that mindset, that idea that I can, along with a business environment that is a compendium of corporate, executive, small business, founders, solopreneurs, fractionals. It just becomes this different prism. I think, and then you see the future of work is changing, and we don't know where it's changing to, and whether it's AI or whether it's, economic environments, whether it is generational shifts and change. All we know is that the volatility seems endless. And so you put those kind of three buckets together, I think you will see more women to be emboldened to create their own career path more than ever before. And again, wherever that might be, corporate, solopreneur, independent, or otherwise, I think that you'll see more of that into next year too. And I think the thing that will be the undergirding part of that is that how do I make my toolbox much more robust for me in the field of that? And that's, I do think it's not networking, it's networks. Networks are the next power source for, you know, next year and beyond. Women collaborating with other women leaders, thinking about new ideas, excited about, fueling their own ambition. Yeah, 94% of the women that we queried said that being around other ambitious women fuels their own
Mm.
ambitious ambition, and proving that boldness is courageous. And so if you're taking leaps and bounds, like these networks, these power sources to kind of like soak up what's happening and then go out and create your path, I think it's just going to be, you're going to see more of that into next year and beyond,
I love
particularly in
that.
the face with AI and technology. And that human connection is that counterbalance to what is, invariably it's coming. We're not stopping. And in fact, we have to embrace a lot of the AI and technology pieces. Obviously, as leaders, it's part of my thinking every day. But what's the counterbalance? And those power sources will be good to feed sort of journeys for women, I think, next year and beyond.
I love the idea that ambition is
Yeah,
contagious. Alison
me
Moore,
too.
CEO of Chief, thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for having me. I appreciate it.